Our theme for today is pleasure activism. And I'll start with a story. The first time I read Audre Lorde's Uses of the erotic as power, was for an introduction to gay and lesbian studies class, as it was called back then, in college. Audre Lorde, a black feminist lesbian poet with a clarion call style of writing, wrote and delivered Uses of the Erotic back in 1978. Lorde begins her essay thus: "There are many kinds of power, used and unused, acknowledged or otherwise. The erotic is a resource within each of us that lies in a deeply female and spiritual plane, firmly rooted in the power of our unexpressed or unrecognized feeling. In order to perpetuate itself, every oppression must corrupt or distort those various sources of power within the culture of the oppressed that can provide energy for change." Okay, she has my attention. In order to perpetuate itself, every oppression must corrupt or distort those various sources of power within the culture of the oppressed that can provide energy for change. Think of shame. Think of guilt, fear, abandonment, rejection. Think of how each and every internal source of energy and power, and externally our collective resolve, that are corrupted and distorted through shame, guilt, fear, rejection, and the like. I think back to the beginnings of the Black Lives Matter movement, when congregations actually spent times debating whether or not to put up a sign out of fear. Fear of reprisal, fear of property destruction, fear of conflict, getting in the way of good. I think back to the beginnings of marriage equality, when the argument against marriage equality was all around the sanctity, the so-called sanctity of marriage, as if your or a hetero marriage would be sullied if I married a woman. Every oppression must corrupt and distort those various sources of power within the culture of the oppressed that can provide energy for change. And this is deeply spiritual. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe that each of us has inherent worth and dignity, that the interdependent web of all of existence is the fabric of our being, that the spark of the divine is within all of us, and that we can bring heaven on earth through what? Through our actions, through our love. We can love the hell out of this world. And that love is power. That love is powerful, and it starts from deep within, from that erotic place that declares how we love and whom we love is the energy for change. Whew. Audre Lorde goes on to say, "For we, as we begin to recognize our deepest feelings, we begin to give up of necessity, of being satisfied with suffering and self-negation, and with the number which so often seems like their only alternative in our society. Our acts against oppression become integral with self, motivated and empowered from within. In touch with the erotic, we become less willing to accept powerlessness or those other supplied states of being which are not native to me, such as resignation, despair, self-effacement, and self-denial." So when Lorde talks about our acts against oppression becoming integral to ourself, motivated, empowered from within, she is pointing to an integrated life, a spiritual life of alignment, where our lives do indeed preach louder than our lips. It means being honest and true to ourselves, attentive to where we may be falling short, reflecting and doing better as a spiritual practice. In recovery circles, it's called cash register honesty. Cash register honesty. Where, sure, if you're at an actual checkout line, now with all those self-automated, an actual checkout line with a clerk, and the clerk may make a mistake and gives you a little extra change, you could keep the money, but it wouldn't be right. And it would be out of alignment with our best selves, our character, so we give it back. That cash register honesty means above and beyond honesty. Even when it's small potatoes to others, we are honest with who we want to be in the world in small and big ways. Audre Lorde goes on to end her essay with this statement: recognizing the power of the erotic within our lives can give us the energy to pursue genuine change within our world, rather than merely settling for a shift of characters in the same weary drama. So, my beloved kin, anytime we are talking and thinking about change in the world, we here together are talking about spiritual community. We are talking about justice. We are talking about our collective power and resolve to transform the world through our love and service, and this is our holy work. I said recently that the root of all social justice is compassion. And if you remember, I love Latin, and the root of the word compassion in Latin is compati or compassio, meaning to suffer with. Compassion means to suffer with. And I said before that the root of all social justice work and organizing is compassion. But today we are flipping compassion as the root of that work to pleasure activism. The uses of the erotic, the power of love. Instead of suffering with, pleasure activism and the power of the erotic points to the politics of feeling good. While compassion puts us in a place that makes us in touch and feeling aligned with the parts of ourselves and others that are suffering, the ways in which our world is hurting, that perpetuates a model of self-effacement, of self-denial, and a cutthroat capitalism that relies on our sacrifice to keep us stuck, not moving forward and transforming the world. To suffer alone is to stay stuck. What we permit, we perpetuate. We have a choice each and every day to evolve or repeat. So today we evolve to the power of transformative love as a vehicle for change. Which leads me to the prophet of our time, Adrienne Maree Brown, and her 2019 book, Pleasure Activism, The Politics of Feeling Good. Brown's book begins with Audre Lorde's full essay, Uses of the Erotic, shared in its entirety as the bedrock of pleasure activism. Brown writes in her chapter, Love as Political Resistance, that we need to learn how to practice love such that care for ourselves and others is understood as political resistance and cultivating resilience. The core idea is tantamount. This core idea is tantamount to our survival. Let me say that again. Practicing love such that care for ourselves and others is tantamount to our survival. What we do is not as important as how we do it together in order to survive. I'll give you an example. I serve a committee of the Unitarian Universalist Association, the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, which is responsible for overseeing the process towards ordination for candidates for ministry and the misconduct cases for ministers. 3 times a year, we gather for a week, an entire week, to interview candidates for ministry and discern how prepared they are for ordination. It is the capstone event for aspiring ministers, like our beloved ministerial intern Kirk, who will come before the MFC just next year. In years past, the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, we would interview a different candidate every 90 minutes. That's years of work, years of ministerial formation boiled down to 90 minutes. It always felt rushed and pressured for time to keep on schedule. Conversations would be cut short, and sometimes when conflicts arose, the pressure to keep on schedule was prioritized over our process. What happened over time is that our relationships suffered, our cohesion fractured, and we would have to spend more time in repair, and healing. So when we had a guest from the then board of the UUA, one of our prior moderators, the late and great beloved ancestor Elandria Williams, E told us that we needed to center care for each other in our work. It was a breath of fresh air to our process. E's reminder to center care meant that we revised the schedule and allowed for more time with each candidate. We made sure that panel members had time for meals, snacks, and breaks. We affirmed that how we worked together was just as important as the work we are doing together. And this reimagining buoyed our resilience and pushed back from the pressures of perfectionism, and gave us our love for each other and our work back. Transformation such as this gave me a fresh perspective, one that Adrienne Maree Brown extensively explores in her book, Pleasure Activism. She points to the need for us to be in rigorous practice of loving each other and ourselves differently, because we can no longer afford to love people the way we've been loving them. In her words, how have we been loving? We've been loving by defining love by obligation, by celebrating love on externally marked holidays, by keeping the realities of love behind closed doors, by framing love as a fairy tale on social media, framing love as a product we give each other, by framing love as a limited resource that gets swallowed and used up, tied in plastic when we're done, and piled up out of sight. We've been loving each other by prioritizing romantic love over self, comrade, and friend love. Brown says to us, we're all going to die if we keep loving this way. Die from isolation, loneliness, depression, abandoning each other to oppression, from lack of touch, from forgetting we are precious. To keep from this withering on the vine, this spiritual emaciation, Brown shares a radical love manifesto. You know I gotta love a good radical manifesto. Brown writes to radical honesty, healing, learning how to change, and building communities of care as a part of this radical love manifesto. In radical honesty, we are taught from an early age that in order to keep the peace, in order to keep relationships, we have to hide or lie. Radical honesty means that our lives align with our truest selves, and thus become the building blocks of authentic relationships and community. Authentic relationships and community becomes the tools, the building blocks, the forces of power to change our world. Brown points to healing. We are all in need of healing on some level. Healing the ways in which we are out of sync with the earth, out of sync with ourselves, out of sync with each other, which leads us to change, learning how to change. The only constant is change. Change is holy and good. And reflecting on how are we embracing change and adapting to the moment, which leads us building communities of care. We often say in spiritual communities, love lives here. Here we say we are practicing courageous love. And as Brown writes, let our lives be a practice ground where we're learning to generate the abundance of love and care that we as a species are longing for. In short, love as political resistance comes from living out this love manifesto. Pleasure is the politic of feeling good, whole, and strong. Pleasure is not self-serving, but in service of something greater than ourselves as an act of faith. Or as Brown writes, true pleasure, joy, happiness, and satisfaction has been this force that helps us move beyond the constant struggle, that helps us live and generate futures beyond this dystopic present, futures worthy of our miraculous lives. Pleasures, embodied, connected pleasure, and it's one of the ways that we know that we are free, that we are always free, that we always have the power to co-create the world. Pleasure helps us move through the times that are unfair, through grief and loneliness, through the terror of genocide, or days that when the demands are just overwhelming. Pleasure heals the places where our hearts and spirit get wounded, Adrienne Maree Brown reminds us. So, my beloved kin, is the world breaking your heart today? Go and share your love with someone who's lonely. Is the news of the day keeping you up at night? Organize a few friends to call or write our elected leaders over brownies and chai. Has the hurt from a past relationship continued to haunt you? Go and make amends. Or if that would cause harm, commit to a living amends. I believe in the depths of my being that a spiritual life is a connected life, a life of service through love and care. A spiritual life thrives in the rays of the sun, under the glow of the moon, and soaks up the truth of our interdependence. A spiritual life grows in the erotic potential of our deepest longings and makes our world better. You, my beloveds, are a good gift, a precious gem of creation. May your life and your love transform our world. And I will close the prayer from my colleague, the Reverend Molly Gausch. Source of love, rise as the spring in our overwintered hearts. Help us stretch from the dark and nourishing soil to the bright and nurturing sunlight. Help us reach one another. Love us back to life in all its fullness as we blossom and unfold amid days that will always contain beauty and terror alike. no matter what else they may hold. May each day contain impossible, inexorable, blooming love. Amen, and blessed be.